special event has been produced by Friends of Buckingham through the efforts of our officers and council, Dr. Scott Flood, President, Karen Karuna Krebs, Secretary and Webmaster, Kenda Haneman, Council Member, and myself, Laura Laniewski, who serves as Treasurer. On behalf of all of the Friends of Buckingham, we would like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. We would also like to sincerely thank UVA for letting us be a part of their Earth Month events. Today, we're examining a topic that's increasingly important as we transition to renewable energy: the environmental and community cost of industrial scale solar. Specifically, we'll dive into the hidden cost of land use for solar powered facilities in Virginia, focusing on forests, farmland, and the ecosystem services we often overlook. This 90-minute presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website in a few days. Kenda Haneman will be our timekeeper and interrupter-in-chief when we go over time limits. We ask that you please mute yourself, and there is a chat button at the bottom of your screens that will allow you to ask questions, which we will be answering those at the end, toward the end of the presentation. And if we don't get to every question in the Q&A, we will address them in our future newsletters. So please join our email list by going to our website, friendsofbuckinghamva.org. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Scott Flood. Scott is president of Friends of Buckingham, joining the group out of a shared vision to protect nature and the well-being of the community. He advocates for the responsible deployment of industrial solar facilities, projects that meet energy needs without destroying vital habitats or compromising local ecosystems. With a biology degree from Longwood University and a dental degree from the Medical College of Virginia, Scott brings a scientific, practical perspective to the conversation, one that prioritizes long-term ecological health and community resilience over the short-term profit. Welcome, Scott.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Laura, that was a great introduction. Today, we are confronting a reality that doesn't get nearly enough attention: the accelerating expansion of industrial-scale solar and the heavy toll it's taking on our land, our ecosystems, and our communities. Solar energy is promoted as a clean, green solution, but the truth is, not all.
Sorry, let me get.
Oh boy.
Just a moment. Scott, you're muted. Scott,
Okay.
unmute, please.
Okay. All right. I'll start back from the beginning here. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Today, we are confronting a reality that doesn't get nearly enough attention: the accelerating expansion of industrial-scale solar and the heavy toll it's taking on our land, our ecosystems, and our communities. Solar energy is promoted as a clean, green solution, but the truth is, not all solar is created equal. Across Virginia and beyond, massive solar installations are being fast-tracked, swallowing up thousands of acres of farmland, forests, and being inserted into rural communities. These aren't rooftop panels or community-scale arrays. These are industrial operations, often backed by corporate interests with little regard for long-term environmental impact or local voices. As the rush to meet renewable energy targets accelerates, we're left asking, at what cost, and more importantly, are we doing this the right way? Who benefits? Who pays the price? And is this truly the sustainable future we've been promised? Let's start with the basics when we choose where we choose to build solar facilities, known as solar siting, matters. And Karuna, I'll have you leave this slide up here for this next part too. The number of industrial scale solar facilities in Virginia has skyrocketed, and with it, the amount of land being consumed. Individually, these installations can be sprawling developments covering thousands of acres. As a group, they are overtaking the landscape like an invasive species. That last slide was from UVA's Weldon Cooper. Those dots that were on the screen there were part of their calculations of what approved projects existed. So all dots but the gray were the projects that are existing. So the number of industrial scale facilities is skyrocketing, with it the amount of land being consumed. And these are attacking us like an invasive species. So think about kudzu, and that's what this picture is here. The invasive vine that crept into Virginia. It spread fast, blanketed everything in its path, and choked out native plants, wildlife, and entire ecosystems. Now imagine that same kind of unchecked spread, not from a plant, but from industrial scale solar facilities. Across Virginia, we're watching a similar pattern unfold. Massive solar projects are overtaking our rural landscapes at an alarming rate. Forests are being cleared, farmland is being lost, wildlife is being destroyed, waterways are being impacted, erosion, runoff, and disrupted hydrology. Just like kudzu, these projects are spreading fast and they're suffocating the very ecosystems we claim to be protecting in the name of clean energy. And the worst part, these industrial solar developments are often sold as environmentally friendly. But the reality in the ground tells us a very different story. If we don't speak up now, hundreds of thousands of acres of Virginia's landscape could be buried under a sea of panels, steel, fencing, and gravel, with little left for species, the people, the places that once thrived there. So how much land are we talking? If we stay on our current path, allowing industrial solar facilities to consume our forests and farmland, Virginia is projected to lose over 1 million acres to these developments. To put this into perspective, Shenandoah National Park is 200,000 acres. That means industrial solar could eventually cover an area 5 times the size of Shenandoah National Park. This isn't a few scattered panels tucked into the landscape. This is a massive transformation of our land with consequences we can't afford to ignore. Take a pause here. Hey, Karuna, can you put that map back we had with the Virginia with the dots? So this is that map from UVA's Weldon Cooper Center. They've compiled the data on the scope of solar facilities across the Commonwealth. This is the one that has each dot representing an approved project, except for the gray dots, of course. The sad thing is these are just the beginning, as an ever-increasing burdensome number of facilities is sought. And I don't know that everyone knows what happens when a facility is built, so I'd like to share some slides of that here next. And Karuna, can we move back to so what does it take to build one of these? Solar siting typically requires land to be rezoned. The result is vast tracts of land that were previously agricultural being changed to industrial. Square mile after square mile after square mile of industrial is wedged into rural communities. It's important to have an understanding of the massive, often permanent changes that happen when these facilities are built. So what's the difference between cutting trees for a solar facility and cutting trees for timber? Cutting trees for timber is typically part of a managed cycle where forests are harvested and then regrown, allowing the land to continue supporting wildlife. Next slide, please. They have supported the wildlife, absorbing carbon, protecting waterways. In contrast, cutting trees for a solar facility usually involves permanent land conversion. Forests are not only cleared, but the earth is stripped bare with all living things removed. The land is leveled and replaced with panels, gravel, and fencing. This not only destroys habitat, but it also disrupts soils, increases runoff, and removes the long-term carbon storage that forests provide. Timber harvesting allows for renewal. Industrial solar often erases the ecosystems altogether. To build an industrial solar facility, the topography is typically bulldozed and permanently altered with mass grading. Mass grading is a large land preparation process where natural topography is reshaped to install roads, fences, long rows of panels. It involves removing everything: trees, their root balls, vegetation, and wildlife. The cut and filling process often moves millions of cubic yards of earth. To put this into perspective, 1,000 acres of panels could move as much as 2 million cubic yards of earth. That's enough to fill about 150,000 dump trucks. Now multiply that times the number of projects projected to be in Virginia. When the mass grading happens, the wildlife that once lived there is no longer. In simple terms, this is a massive kill of all living things that cannot flee. And what are the refugees that manage to escape the heavy machinery? They must compete for homes, breeding grounds, water, and food in an ever-decreasing supply of habitat elsewhere. When forests and farms are overtaken, the environmental costs are steep. So are the economic costs. The jobs once supported and relied on across the community are erased. I'll take a little pause here. Karuna, there should be a different PowerPoint that has.
Yeah, I'm saying
Okay, no problem.
let me do what I can. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. So this has been a huge problem across Virginia.
Okay. Here we go. So sorry. Slideshow.
So the big problem comes when forests and farms are overtaken. The environmental costs are steep. So are the economic costs. Jobs that once supported and relied on across the community are erased. One of the biggest issues that we've seen across the state environmentally has been the improperly managed runoff that can lead to sediment entering waterways, which harms water quality and aquatic habitats. And Karuna, I'm going to ask you to move on to, there's a D, that's perfect. That's the DEQ slide there. That demonstrates what's been occurring. And according to a 2023 Department of Environmental Quality review, 70% of solar facilities in Virginia have encountered significant non-compliance issues. These issues have led to fines and enforcement actions against developers. Violations such as improper handling of erosion, sediment, and stormwater runoff. This is widespread across many Virginia counties and waterways. A simple online search will lead you to countless news reports and stories, videos of different environmental problems that have occurred to our waterways here in Virginia and across the country. This particular photo that's up now is from the Chattahoochee River in Georgia, and the sediment that you're seeing that's spewing into the massive river is coming from an environmental problem about 12 to 15 miles upstream in Alabama. So now let's talk about something called ecosystem services. So our ecosystem services, they are the unseen benefits that nature provides us for free. When we lose forests and farmland to industrial solar development, we lose much more than just scenery. We lose biodiversity, water quality, local climate regulation. In other words, solar panels alone don't make a project green. We need to look at the full picture, including what was sacrificed to make the project possible. The report, Growing Solar, Protecting Nature, co-authored by Mass Audubon and Harvard Forest. This report emphasizes the critical role of forests in providing essential ecosystem services, such as carbon sequestration, wildlife habitat, clean water, and flood protection. This report highlights that forests and farmlands are natural carbon sinks, absorbing greenhouse gas emissions annually.
Excuse me, Scott.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Scott. I just want to let you know you've got 2
No
minutes
problem.
left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The authors argue that the current trend of large-scale ground-mounted solar installations on forests and farms is counterproductive, as it leads to the loss of the vital ecosystems. They, as we, advocate for a shift towards utilizing rooftops, parking lots, and other developed areas for solar energy development to preserve these natural resources. By adopting this approach, renewable energy goals can be met without sacrificing the environmental benefits provided by forests and farmlands. So where does this leave us? Let's be clear. Solar energy is a vital part of our climate future, but we need to do it smarter with thoughtful, ecologically sound planning. In Virginia and across the US, we have opportunities to implement solar in ways that do not come at the cost of our natural ecosystems. Here are a few pathways. Prioritize the built world. Places like old landfills, brownfields, abandoned industrial zones, parking lots, and rooftops. These are all spaces where solar can thrive without harming ecosystems. We can build a clean energy future without sacrificing the natural systems we depend on, but it takes intention, collaboration, and accountability. Industrial solar is becoming one of the most dominant forces reshaping our landscapes. So as we reflect on the promise of solar power, let's also take time to ask hard questions and look beneath the surface. Because while solar panels shimmer in the sun, the shadows they cast on forests, farms, and communities cannot be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. Our next speaker is Mr. J.W. Thompson. J.W. has enjoyed a 30-plus year career in civil engineering and surveying industry. He's a retired Army National Guard soldier and an unapologetic rural rabble-rooster of sorts who turned a developer's dismissive comment into a 4-year grassroots campaign that helped defeat the first ever utility-scale solar project denied by the Ohio Power Siting Board. Blending 30 years of professional experience with a working man's wit, his mission is simple: protect rural communities with facts, faith, and a little front porch firepower. Welcome, JW.
Thank you. Before I get into what I came to talk to you all about today, I want to thank you, Dr. Flood and Friends of Birmingham, for inviting me to this conversation. You're all doing something greatly important here, something brave, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. Now, if you logged in this afternoon expecting a polished TED Talk full of buzzwords like limitless green energy, mutual prosperity, for me, I hate to disappoint you. If this is the case, you're about to feel like a University of Virginia quarterback trying to run a play against Ohio State's front line. Undersized, unprepared, and probably wondering what the heck you're doing here. However, if you came here for an honest, maybe slightly snarky take on what happens when Wall Street megawatts collide with backroad values, then you're definitely in the right place. Good afternoon. My name is, I skipped ahead. My name is J.W. Thompson. I'm a proud son, husband, and father. I've spent over 30 years in the civil engineering and land surveying industry. I've helped design everything from basic backyard septic systems to major freeway interchanges. So when I say I can tell the difference between a real grading plan and something cooked up by a PowerPoint warrior, I mean it. I'm also a retired 20-year veteran of the Army National Guard. I didn't just learn to improvise, adapt, and overcome. It was burned into my muscle memory. And today I use that same mindset to face a different kind of fight, one that doesn't happen overseas or in a military conflict, but right here in the heart of America. That fight, well, it's against something called the DAD model, used by renewable energy developers across the country. First, they decide without you, they announce with flair, and finally, they defend. They defend with pseudoscience, consultants in crisp suits, and a parade of so-called solar experts who've likely never once walked on your property or listened to your concerns. In 2020, a few neighbors and I formed a grassroots opposition group to stop a 300 megawatt project here in our Northwest Ohio community. No outside money, no publicist, no staff, just grit, spreadsheets, and a deep love for a place we call home. And we won. We became the first community to ever defeat a utility scale solar project who made application to the Ohio Power Siting Board. I never set out to be an activist or community organizer. Even saying those phrases out loud make me cringe a little bit. I became one the day a solar rep tried to pull the wool over my eyes while failing to ask some of the most basic questions about drainage. I'm not a policy wonk. I don't wear a lab coat. I don't work for big oil or big anything for that matter. I'm just like most of you, a working human calculator. I spent my life weighing risk versus reward, like we all do. For example, we often ask ourselves things like, what's the fastest and safest way to travel to work? Can we afford to go on vacation this year? And perhaps the bravest question of all, what do you want for supper? When it comes to renewables, we need to be asking ourselves things like, could this project flood my property? Will it lower my home values? Is the trade-off worth it for me, our kids, our grandkids? Or is this just snake oil masquerading as a solar facility? Wall Street does similar kind of analysis. However, you and I just do it with different tools. They do it behind a mahogany desk, sitting in fancy offices. You and me, we do it sitting at the kitchen table, usually after supper or after we put the kids down for the night. So how do these developers work? They follow a 3-part process I've dubbed the 3 V's. Number 1, volume. They'll bury you in studies, environmental reports, traffic studies, flood models, most of it designed merely to overwhelm, not to inform. Number 2, they move exceedingly fast, quickly launching misinformation campaigns, requesting expedited permitting, good neighbor agreements with Friday deadlines, and local or state boards rushing votes before you even know what's happening. And then number 3, if you speak up, you're suddenly anti-science, a climate denier, a tool of big oil, or worst of all, you're a NIMBY. You know, one of the not in my backyard ilk. Around here, we've improved that NIMBY acronym. We define it as next, it might be you. After listening to so many solar reps over the years, it has become increasingly obvious that they aren't always the sharpest tools in the shed. So I don't believe there's any way they came up with this strategy on their own. More than likely, they or their well-paid business management consultants borrowed and applied ideas from renowned publications like Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, or from every slick talking manager who ever sold something they didn't know hide nor hair from. Developers wrap all this up in something, as I mentioned previously, the DAD model. First, they decide. Usually, they do this decision-making behind closed doors and in secrecy. Next, they announce, typically at events like public meetings, celebrating their project with a lot of hoopla, balloons, cookies, and lots of promises. And then they defend with a barrage of consultants and baffling studies. As the old comedic actor W.C. Fields once said, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with BS. Let me tell you, renewable developers have taken that quote to heart. Now, why does your fight here in Buckingham matter to the rest of us? Because, like you, Buckingham has helped stop the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and now you're fighting or staring down new ones like Mountain Pine Solar and its solar siblings. But this just isn't a local fight. It is a national trend. Virginia, like many states, is being tested. Senate Bill 697 would take zoning powers away from your community and hand it to a statewide board. That means no local say and no local control. Sound familiar? Well, it should. Michigan just did it. Ohio, Illinois, New York, they've all done it. Wisconsin, Indiana, Pennsylvania, they're working on similar legislation. What's happening here is a test run for rural muting. Let's be real here. This just isn't about electricity. Clear-cutting pine forest to build solar panels, that's like selling your truck's tailgate to buy a spoiler. Looks sporty, just loses functionality. Even NASA has found that cornfields in the Midwest are sucking up more carbon than in the Amazon. Meanwhile, solar panels are just lounging in the field across the road, soaking up the sun and subsidies and contributing to about as much carbon capture as a lawn chair in July. And what are the ripple effects? Timber jobs are gone. Hunting leases gone. Sawmills, firewood gone. And prime farmland is gone. And so solar panels, well, they just don't buy pipes, they just don't buy pies at church auctions. They don't coach Little League baseball. And they sure as the day is long, don't build legacies. Out here, a view shed isn't just a view. It's a way of life. It's a cherished memory. It's an heirloom, if you will. We lose that in a story phrase. So how do we fight back? We do it with lobbyists, not with lawsuits. We don't do it with lobbyists, nor with lawsuits, but with coffee pot democracy. Here's a loose roadmap. Number one, we need to slow the clock. Delay is our friend. We need to do things like filing multiple freedom of information requests, asking for hearing extensions. And, if you have to bribe the town clerk with a homemade pie a time or two to buy some time, well, mum's the word here. Number two, we need to share and do our homework. We need to research a developer's seemingly outlandish claims, find opposing studies, and relay these to our community. We can do something as simple as overlaying panel plans on satellite maps and sharing them with our neighbors. And probably most important, we need to help financially support the local opposition groups. Listen, one visual can stop 100 rumors. One study can change opinion. And a handful of $20 donations can move mountains. Number three, we need to keep potlucks alive. Have events like Cards and Controversies Night, whether that equates to your monthly card club or playing down at the local bar. Brownies and bullet points equals change. If you know someone who signed a lease, don't shame them. Just hand them a plate of those brownies, because grace is greater than guilt. And then number four, today's silent neighbor might be tomorrow's best witness. Leave space for redemption. It travels much faster than resentment. Let's see where I'm lost in my PowerPoint here. I apologize. Look, there's so much more that I could ever cover in the time given here today, but this conversation, it's just a start. Over the past 4 years, I've been helping opposition groups all across Ohio and the United States. I've freely shared my thoughts on Facebook, Substack, and now for the shameless plug in my new book. If anything I have shared this afternoon resonates with you and you wish to learn more, please sign up for a new copy of the book. It's called Don't Get Played: How the Green New Scam is Playing Rural Communities. It's a doozy, somewhere around 900 pages. After this meeting, I'm actually releasing the second edition of this book that has 2 new chapters. One specifically on solar panel coatings, and number 2 on stray voltage. Additionally, I'm releasing a companion coloring book for young children, a book that parents can use to help correct the misinformation that correct the misinformation about renewable energy that our children might be learning in schools.
Excuse me, JW, you've got 2 minutes.
Yep, I'm wrapping it up. Secondly, it can help create an opportunity to teach our children about things like heritage, honesty, and legacy. And perhaps most importantly, I set this coloring book up to have 2 panels per page. This way, a mom or dad can color one side while a child colors the other. I've learned opposing these developments. They take or steal so much time away from our families. I thought this might be one way to include our children into our efforts. And the best part, I'm giving it away for free. No, seriously, this isn't an infomercial, no catches, no fine print. It's my way of paying forward the help I received in our fight against the renewable energy industry. No hard copies though, just digital downloads. All I'm asking is you sign up and I'll email it to you. Print it, share it, wrap your lunch in it, whatever helps you in your fight. To Dr. Flood, the Friends of Buckingham, and every rural defender out there, thank you. Thank you for your time, your grit, and for asking the hard questions while others just nod and hope it passes. May your soil stay loamy. May your wells stay clean. May every solar sales pitch be greeted with a skeptical raised eyebrow. And don't forget to always wave to your neighbors when they pass by. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, JW, and looking forward to reading your book. Our final speaker is Mr. David Del Garcia, a seasoned executive with nearly 4 decades of leadership in the specialty chemical industry, culminating in the oversight of a $2 billion division spanning the Americas. A Lehigh University biology graduate with further executive development from Wharton, David has also worked in biotech and actively serves on several industry and community boards. Today, he brings his wealth of experience and insight to our conversation. Welcome, David.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share thoughts and facts. I think Dr. Flood and JW, you hit on a lot of things that that we look at and that we promote as far as education, to try to educate people on the realities of what's going on, positive, negative, and different. The Virginia Energy Consumer Trust, just a brief moment on that. We were actually a splinter group from the Virginia Manufacturers Association, which I was on the board of until I retired in 2020. The goal was that when the Virginia Clean Economy Act was signed, it became pretty clear that if the way it was written, if it followed that roadmap, that most, if not all, of manufacturing in Virginia would disappear and go off to other states that were more manufacturing friendly. So the Energy Trust was created to initially support manufacturing in the state from an energy standpoint. In the meantime, as it turned out, it evolved in a somewhat different direction. And as of 2023, became separated from the Virginia Manufacturers Association. And what we see is the majority of the interest that we get is to educate people on wind and solar. There doesn't seem to be much interest at the moment to be educated on nuclear and natural gas. We do not really engage in discussions on coal. Coal's very difficult to defend right now when you have alternatives, whether they're fossil fuel based or not, that are, let's say, more environmentally friendly from just about every standpoint. And we also look at some new technologies, whether it's hydrogen or reforming fuels from waste, things like that, which is becoming very interesting in Virginia now. A couple of things, and primarily our goal is to share facts, as many facts as we can put together, whether they're federal data, state data, university data, et cetera. And we have people that we interact with regularly from state universities, NC State, Virginia Tech, as well as industry and utilities. We communicate with solar developers, and really interesting to have the discussions with the solar developers when they actually confirm what you're saying. So that's very helpful. Let me start with point number one on the energy needs of Virginia. Okay, in 2022, Virginia, for all sources of energy needs, whether it was residential, commercial, or industrial, consumed 128 million megawatt hours of electricity. Okay, 128 million. Dominion in their resource plan is now projecting that by 2036, including all the data centers that are at least on the books or being proposed, the energy demand of Virginia will be greater than 300 million megawatt hours. So more than double what the demand was in 2022. Virginia in 2022, in state, produced 91 million megawatt hours of electricity and purchased the remaining from out of state. Okay. When you look at the Virginia Clean Economy Act, what it says is that by 2050, all energy in Virginia is designed to be produced within the state. Okay. Eliminate all fossil fuel-based sources, coal and natural gas. No new nuclear versus what we have today. Okay. And combination of renewables for the remainder. Okay, so let's put some numbers on the table. 300 million megawatt hours. The two nuclear power plants we have generate about 30 million megawatt hours of power per year. Okay. And with phase one of coastal Virginia offshore wind, if and when it comes on stream, it'll generate about 8 million megawatt hours of electricity. All right. Round it off to 10. So now you have about 40 million megawatt hours out of the 300 million megawatt hours or so that the state's going to require. Okay. According to Dominion. So that means 260 million megawatt hours has to come from someplace. And that someplace, the way the Virginia Clean Economy Act was written, was from solar. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean there can be no new nuclear or no new natural gas, because there was an out written in the Virginia Clean Economy Act that said, for reliability purposes, nuclear and natural gas can be implemented. But it also says that nuclear and natural gas are not in the public interest, which is a very vague and nobody really knows what it means, whereas wind and solar is in the public interest. So there's a lot of interpretive language in the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Okay, so let's just say 260 million megawatt hours by 2036, or let's say by 2050, but based on 2036 numbers. What does that mean? Okay. Now, Scott, you said the projection was over 1 million acres of Virginia land for solar. Well, if you follow the Virginia Clean Economy Act, what it really says is 6 million acres. Not one, 6. Maybe one on the books or being considered today, but by 2050, it means 6 million acres. All right. Virginia has 3 million acres of farmland and 15 million acres of forest. All right. So you sit back and say, well, are we going to use all of our farmland for solar? That's unlikely. Okay. It's more likely it'll be less than 1 million acres of farmland, but let's say 1 million. Well, that means 5 million acres of forest has to be cut down to put into solar service to fulfill the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Okay, 6 million acres. It's a lot. 1/3 of our forest in Virginia. That's a lot. Okay. What does that mean from an environmental standpoint? Well, now you get into a really big discussion. Let's stay with just CO2. Okay. An acre of forest absorbs about 2,000 acres of CO2 per year. okay? Although there's new data that suggests it's about 2,500 tons of CO2 per year. Well, when you get rid of, if it were to go that way and we eliminate 5 million acres, okay, of farmland, right, times 2,000 tons per year, we're talking about huge, huge numbers of CO2 that will not be absorbed, all right? Let's talk about the social costs. And the reason I bring that up is because there was an article recently by an energy economist from UVA on a natural gas-fired power plant that's being proposed for Chesterfield County, on the amount of CO2 that it will generate and the social costs. And the social costs were quite high in terms of about $10 billion based on 1,000 gigawatt natural gas-fired power plant, which will be emitting, quite a bit of CO2, let's face it. It's not perfect, okay? But if you look at the same data at the same rates for eliminating 5 million acres of forest, 2,000 tons an acre, the social costs of using forest for solar and eliminating the trees that absorb the CO2 is about 20 times the equivalent energy generation from natural gas-fired power plants. Now, I'm not sitting here to advocate for natural gas-fired power plants. What I'm telling you is that solar has social costs that exceed natural gas-fired power plants and the CO2 it generates if you base it on CO2 and CO2 equivalent emissions into the atmosphere. That's big, 20 times. All right. That's the social cost aspect. We're talking 5 million acres of forest has a social cost of only $10 trillion using the UVA energy economist data. Okay, only 10 trillion. All right, let's get into a little bit of the environmental aspects, and Scott Flood hit on them. And I'm not trying to repeat it, but there have been plenty of articles. You have the DEQ with greater than 70% of the solar fields in Virginia currently that are out of compliance on, erosion and water runoff, contaminating waterways, etc. The Mountain Valley Pipeline that has gone through now, but there was litigation brought against Mountain Valley Pipeline a couple of years ago to try to prevent it or at least delay it. And the amount of land that was being impacted to complete the Mountain Valley Pipeline, what was trying to be blocked, was about 300 acres. Okay. And the litigated lawsuit, what did it say was the reasons why the Mountain Valley Pipeline should not be completed on these 300 acres? Water contamination, species extinction, plant and wildlife habitat decimation, potential accidents. Didn't talk about fires, which you have a big fire problem with solar fields. And by the way, JW, in Ohio, you've had a bunch. Okay. You get into
Excuse me, David, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay. So what was interesting was the litigation lawsuits were brought by environmentalists, but we have not had a single lawsuit against the solar field projection and development by those same environmentalists in Virginia. Okay, and a single solar field, generally industrial scale, is somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 acres. And you saw Scott Flood's presentation, so you know what kind of decimation that creates. So there are impacts, okay, and they affect everybody. And we put out a list of best practices to try to educate the counties when they do their conditional use permits, assuming they're going to go forward with solar fields, of the things that they should be requiring the solar developers to do. We've seen a few of them go forward, but in many cases, the key ones are not, because the counties just aren't educated enough to understand what the impacts are on the residents, adjacent properties, and things like that. So we continue with this education process to try to bring everybody up to speed on real data, not testimonials and sales projections. The last thing I'll tell you is on solar. Dominion published recently their solar fields that they operate, and every one of them is operating under the projected generation. They're all at about 70% of what was projected. And the Virginia Association of Counties is reporting that those counties that are reporting said that all their solar fields are underperforming on the amount of revenue that's being generated by them, because they're not operating at what you quote unquote the designed generation capacity. So there are so many issues, and J.W. Thompson said it correctly. You know, you really need to have the facts. You really need to look at the real data.
Excuse me, David,
Make the
that's your
best
time.
decision.
If you can finish up.
Yeah, that's good. That's it. I'll just leave it at that. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them the best I can.
Thank you so much, David, for that great presentation. And I think we are going to transition into our Q&A, which Kenda Haneman is going to sort of oversee that.
Yes, thank you. Fabulous information from all our speakers. And there are some wonderful answers to some of the things that were brought up in a video clip that we have of Dan Holmes from 2022, actually 3 years ago, that really answers some of these things. If we have time, I'd love for us to at least see a few minutes of what he had to say and maybe get some answers. So we've been getting, I didn't see any questions come in the chat, so I'm not sure if our chat's not working.
Yeah, we just got 2 questions right after David asked for them.
Okay. We do have questions from when we had registrations. And what I'd like to do is maybe present one of these questions to one of our speakers and just see where we go from there. We've got about 20 minutes to do this. So until 9 after. And we are going to go an hour and a half. It looks like we've got too much to cover for an hour. So
there's a question for me. Where can we find my facts and figures? So
go ahead.
It depends on which facts and figures you're talking about. The electricity generation data is all federal, so you can find it online. Every state reports how much energy that they've consumed. The projections by Dominion are part of their resource plan, which has been submitted to the SCC, the state of Virginia SCC. So that's public as well. Okay, and then they also publish how they plan on attempting to meet the energy demand. So the numbers are public numbers as far as the energy use and projected energy growth and demand going forward. Okay.
If you have any kind of a slide that you might send to us that we could post on our website, that might be really useful for people to be able to refer to. If it gave them links to access that information, is that possible?
Yeah, I'd have to create one to do that. Okay.
Yeah, I know it's not easy, but if you can, we'd appreciate it.
The data relative to the amount of land It's based on Duke Energy and Dominion Energy saying that for 1 megawatt of solar, installed solar panels is 10 acres. Okay. When you do the math the other way around and say, well, a solar panel is 2 square meters, and then you do, that they're about 450 watt generation, which actually most of the ones installed right now in Virginia do not generate 400 watts. They're lower than that, but let's say 450 because it'll get there.
Thank you, David. We're trying to allow about 2 minutes for responses. So if you want just a few more seconds to finish that thought, we'd like to move on to another question.
No, I'll just say that the information, some of the data comes from Duke Power and Dominion, okay? And some of it is just based on calculations of the data that they have provided.
Okay, thank you. There have been questions regarding the fact that some feel that we absolutely have to have utility scale solar. It's the only way we're going to get by, including what David was saying about the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And once again, I would say Dan Holmes does a beautiful job of describing generated distribution and how we can do so much better in already developed industrial locations than taking away agricultural land. So maybe if you stick around to the end, we'll have a chance to listen to Dan Holmes describe that. The energy needs for data centers. Would one of our speakers like to address that? Because that's doubling what the energy requirement is now that we're using. And that seems to be a blind spot that we have, that we just have to have more and more and more. So would any of this?
I can only talk about Virginia. I can't really speak about other states. One data center can use more electricity than a whole county in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If the data center has AI, then it uses 2.5 times the energy of a non-data center, a non-AI data center. Okay. So this is huge. Out of the greater than 300 million megawatt hours, with the projected number of data centers by 2036, about half to 60%, 50 to 60% of the electricity demand in Virginia will be data centers.
So David, what can we do about that? It doesn't sound good.
Well, it depends on your perspective. The state is encouraging data centers and has been for the last 10 years, okay? The bigger challenge, well, there's two. There's generation capacity doesn't exist, and then the transmission capacity. And they're two mutually exclusive things. And you've read articles where the data centers are, in fact, wanting to put in their own generation, in some cases on site, or they want to contract with, nuclear power to restart, for instance, 3 Mile Island, and Amazon wants to get 3 Mile Island back up and running and contract for all the power out of that, but it has to be able to get to the Amazon data centers. So the transmission is a huge challenge as well.
So would one of our other speakers be able to talk to that question as well, just so we keep to about 2 minutes per speaker?
I don't have much more to add. Electricity is one of the major concerns for data centers, and I've worked on a few, and what David mentioned, many of them would prefer to generate on site with natural gas. It's just getting that gas to the site, but they also look at the tax benefits for renewables. So I think that's what's driving the renewable push for data centers. But the other concern with data centers specifically, it's not necessarily the dirty side of renewables, but it's the water element. How much water those facilities need to cool the facilities. So that's my take on data centers real quick.
Yeah, thank you. Scott, did you want to say something?
As far as the amount of electricity, right now we're using about 28,000 megawatts, for our current needs. And as the data center demand increases, it's projected to exponentially increase into the future. But what I don't think's really been done is a full analysis of what we could get out of the built world, what analysis we could have from the parking lots and the rooftops and everything that's already disturbed land. And I think that's the missing equation right now. Places that have done that, like Massachusetts, have found that there's ample availability in those locations to do it without disturbing the forests and farmlands. And I think that's really our biggest issue right now, is transitioning the mindset from, okay, if we're going to do solar energy, then we need to not touch the natural resources to do that. We need to not harm nature while that's happening. And that's just not the path we're on right now. So it's really just an analysis of how much parking lot is out there and rooftop, and both of those numbers by projection easily exceed our current demand. So how much demand will we have in 2050? I think we're going to have a whole lot better ways of generating solar energy into our built world. I think we're going to have buildings that are able to generate this type of power and other ways of doing it. So I don't think we should sacrifice nature at this point.
Thank you, Scott. That's a hot topic. I really appreciate all of your input on that. I would like to move on. There was a question about solar farms, and I will put the word farms in quotes. Are these things farms? They're factories, they're facilities. They are not anywhere near a farm, and they're on agricultural land, which is farms. A great disparity there. People were concerned about that. Do you have anything you'd like to say in response to that? Any one of the speakers? If not, we can move on.
Yeah, I would. Definitely not farms. Anything that consumes thousands of acres, requires heavy machinery, hundreds of miles of fencing, wiring, and gravel access roads, contain hazardous materials and a 30-year occupation life. It's not a farm, it's an industrial infrastructure. And and unfortunately, across the country, developers get special rights and privileges because people think it's green, therefore it's agriculture. That's just not the case, and we really need to change that perception, because I can't remember who, if David or Scott mentioned it earlier. These areas are rezoned from agricultural to industrial, and these rights and privileges that they get, no other industry gets. I mean, a mom and pop industry can't build a new factory on agricultural land and get the same benefits or privileges that solar can. So it's a total sham, in my opinion.
Thank you, JW. There were a number of questions about VCAA, the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and what we're going to do about those requirements, because obviously it's a sticky wicket, to say the least. Do you have any thoughts about that? Should we start with Scott?
Well, the Virginia Clean Economy Act, you really did pick a sticky one there, Hahnemann. Yeah, it's just by the posturing of the legislature, it's going to be like so many laws that change over time and be reevaluated. It's just a matter of who's going to be in charge and who's going to make the decisions, and the not the environmental climate, but just the political climate that's behind it. So it's going to take pressure, from the citizens influencing their delegates and their senators and their governor, to make these decisions and say, this is important and this needs to be protected. So that's where that needs to go moving forward. It's just notifying, being involved, actively going out and pursuing and talking to your legislators and, you know, just making things happen and becoming part of groups that can work on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah,
Scott. Did David want to say something?
Yeah, I think the Virginia Clean Economy Act as written, and I wrote an editorial on it a year ago, is unachievable as written. It's not practical. It'll have a huge impact on the economy of Virginia in a negative fashion.
Yep.
I think it needs a lot of revision and rethought. The Energy Trust is an advocate of all forms of energy. We're not against any one form of energy, like I said, other than coal. But we also have conditions on it. We don't believe in energy at any cost. There has to be a national security aspect. There has to be an affordability aspect. There has to be energy justice aspect. And when you look at the Virginia Clean Economy Act, it kind of ignores a big piece of that based on what it says and what it's trying to achieve. So it's not really fulfilling the basic principles of our organization. Needs to be revised and relooked at in a holistic way.
Yeah, definitely holistic. The big picture matters. I'm wondering what you think about the fact that this energy demand is happening and we're helping to fuel it by using things that require these data centers. We are the data center capital of the world, I'm told. I think we have 460 for Virginia alone. How are we going to survive that? And what would we be willing to change to make sure that doesn't come to be? Anybody have thoughts on that?
Tough question. You know, it depends, you know, the direction of our lifestyles being much more electronic, data, digital. It's this is what the data centers support, the cloud, things like that, you know, getting away from hard print, you know, into the digital world. So, you know, are we willing to step back and do things the way we did it 30, 40 years ago, 100 years ago? It's a tough one. So you have to have the support infrastructure for the way we're headed, and that's where the data centers come. That's what they do.
Yep, that's what they do. Do either of the other speakers want to speak to that, or would you like one more question and then we can?
Mine is more on the expansion. One of the things we really didn't hit on, so we're talking about data centers, we didn't talk about transmission lines. So that's another negative to placing these solar power plants in rural, remote areas away from where the electricity is being used. Now you have to build new high voltage power lines to get the electricity where it's going. And I sound like a broken record, but when it's in the built world already, you don't have to transport it as far. So it can use existing lines or upgraded lines, you know, inside that same system without going and, you know, disturbing more lands, more waterways, more hillsides, more forests, more farms being confiscated for its use.
Let me make another comment because I think I saw in a question, you know, the fire risks. And one of the major areas of fire risk relative to, there is major fire risk relative to solar.
Oh, yeah.
10% of solar fields catch fire every year. Not all of those fires go off the property, okay, but some do. And most of the solar fields being proposed now also have battery storage components to it. And, you know, last year they had that big fire in June out in California with a major battery storage where the place just went up and the whole thing was decimated because once these battery fires start, you can't put them out with water. It doesn't work. They just keep going. And in the end, when you see battery storage in combination with a solar field, if a battery component catches fire, how are you going to put them out? Okay, well, the only way to put out an electrical fire that has these unique ingredients and construction has to be a very unique chemistry. Okay, and the main chemistry to put out these fires is also toxic to humans to breathe. So there's another dimension now with these battery storage units on site beyond the fires that the solar fields in and of themselves, in the inverters, the wiring, and the transformers that catch fire. Okay. You have the battery component now, which is really the Wild West of unknown.
And David, I think you said 5 million. Did 5 million acres for solar? Did that include battery backup and the redundancy that you need for battery backup?
Usually, when you have battery backup, the land demand gets larger by about 15 to 20%.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
and not also to be redundant, you saw in Scott's presentation, you know, when they build a solar field, they essentially grade it and strip all the topsoil. A lot of the developers, maybe the more unscrupulous ones, they actually sell that topsoil to mitigate the cost of construction. And so once that topsoil is gone, that'll never be farmland again, ever, ever, ever.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's
So-
below is compacted, right?
Absolutely. It's all hard, and that's why you have the erosion and water runoff problems. So you sit back and you look at it, and there have been many articles published. I have a list of them, you know, on, you know, the effects of the grading and the topsoil stripping. And one of the things we see with the counties is the counties don't, in the conditional use permits, really have anything to say or put in a requirement that the topsoil has to be reconstituted if the solar field were to be decommissioned.
Excuse me, David. I'm sorry. I'm just seeing there's so many questions in the chat and I didn't even know they were there. So you had mentioned fire and someone else mentioned, what about natural disasters? You know, I've seen pictures of fields that were destroyed by hail. So just
Yeah.
something to think about. But I would like to bring up some of these other good questions quickly, if you don't mind. They're asking about the cadmium telluride in panels. Is there anything that any of the speakers can say about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, First Solar has been promoting their cadmium telluride as, let's say, not getting into the soil, okay, that it's not soluble. The challenge you have is that cadmium telluride is soluble at low pHs, and the soil we have in Virginia with the red clay is about a pH of 3.5. Okay, so if the cadmium telluride were to get into the soil, it will begin to decompose into, you know, its components, and it will find its way into the water, whether it's surface water, likely not well water for years, but could eventually over 30 or 40 years, but definitely into surface water. And, you know, I had the concern at the Prince Edward meeting where they were going to use cadmium telluride, and that flows into the Appomattox, which is where I get my water from. Okay. So the reality is at neutral pHs, it might be stable, but at acidic pHs, it's not.
Yeah, that's a really important point too.
It's an important point about the soil types too. There's different soil types in different areas of the country and different oil areas of the state. The Piedmont soil is different than the coastal plain, which is different than the mountains. And what happens to your soil? The red clays, they oxidize, and that's the acid forming soils that you get in a lot of the areas of the state. So it's a good point.
There were several questions about agrivoltaics, using farmland along with solar fields, and using, bees and wildflowers and plantings. Would any of you like to speak about that?
So far, I mean, it is unfortunately more of a developer's, sales technique to make them sound nicer than they are. I think if you look at the existing projects and the number of agrivoltaics that are out there, you'll see that it's very, very small. You'll also see things touted as agrivoltaics. Here in Buckingham, there is a facility off of, about a 20 megawatt facility that they're touting. There's a nice article in the newspaper about the agrivoltaics they have there. And when you read the article, they have 4 beehives, which are awesome, but I don't think that qualifies your solar project as being agrivoltaics. I think people are more picturing that you've somehow managed to keep the cattle grazing there, or you've managed to somehow keep the crop production that's there. And then there's just a host of other complications that arise, from doing those sort of things, the unknowns. Is there another speaker that has more detailed information?
Not more detailed, but we've seen a couple of articles written on where, they have goats grazing beneath the solar panels. What's happened is there have been a few developers that have put a tremendous amount of money into the solar field to try to demonstrate the viability of agrivoltaics. Unfortunately, those fields aren't profitable, and the developers don't want to put that kind of money into it. Okay. And, can it be done? Sure. But, according to PV Magazine, the average solar field loses $5,700 per megawatt. So if the average solar field isn't already profitable, they're not going to put the extra money in to put in, 10-foot stanchions to put the solar panels on so that the goats can graze underneath there on limited grass. It's an interesting idea and concept, but it's not financially viable.
And mentioning finances, there's several questions about that. The money involved in this and private equity pushing this being the reason for the trend nationally. Do you have any input on that, any of you speakers?
I can give you what I know. Within Virginia, this is focused on Virginia. There is a private equity group based out of Charlottesville that is totally invested in renewables. Okay. That's wind and solar. And over the last 7 years, the owners and the principals in that private equity group have given the Democratic Party over 100 million of Virginia, over $100 million in donations. They also set up the solar lobby to write the Virginia Clean Economy Act, because this is like the Wild West for the solar developers, and that was the goal. So in the end, it's just like anything, whether you want to call it Wall Street or Charlottesville or what have you. This is how people make money, and they don't really care about what people think. They care about how they're gonna, make money for themselves and for their investors. And it's kind of the way it works.
Mhm.
But this is what we have going on in Virginia, and why the Virginia Clean Economy Act came the way it came. And why they're trying to push more legislation through, being driven by this private equity money out of Charlottesville to take the decision away from counties and put it on the state's hands.
It's been a stimulating answers from these questions, and lots of good questions being submitted, and we've kept everybody muted the whole time, and Ray is really asking if he could speak Are you all okay if we listen to what Ray would like to ask? And Ray, I would hope you could keep yours to 2 minutes too, just like our speakers have.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really have been interested in solar, and the important points I'd like to make is that more solar is needed to offset the great harm to the planet that mining, drilling, refining, and burning fossil fuels cause. Everybody knows that. I also think it is a mistake to clear trees, to obtain clear land, to use solely for solar energy production. I think that's bad. But agrivoltaics have a great promise. Solar modules can provide beneficial effects for the food growing under them. Yields of some crops are significantly higher on land that is under solar panels. In addition to that, the soil moisture retention is much higher, and the soil temperature is much lower. And because of that, the solar production increases when crops are grown under them. So I wanted to point those things out because I think it's worth looking at. I know that big solar farms are in it for the money, and I think they need to be respectful of the earth. And I think that agrivoltaics offer us a way to do that. If we
Ray,
have
I
to use farmland.
I appreciate your opinion. I see JW shaking his head. Would you like to hear
Yeah.
what he would like to say to that?
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
what I'm hearing is a new school environmentalist that is 100% different than the opinions of an old school environmentalist. Renewables are going to, how much mining is going to need to take place to implement 100% renewable solution is just, it's sickening, and it's going to adversely affect our environment more than any fossil fuel burning energy generation we have today.
I don't see that.
It just will.
How?
There's just so much in what he said, but the mining alone is terrible. And the problems we have with mining today, it's being done with human enslaved labor, child labor. So, if you want to support and endorse those types of human rights violations,
Sure, absolutely.
that's great. But I don't think that's what most people in the United States would want to do.
On the other hand, may I?
Go ahead.
On the other hand, the mining and the damage done by digging for and making fossil fuels, I think is far greater damage to the planet. And the point is that when you mine minerals that are needed for solar panels, there's not very much that's needed. Those solar panels will last for 30 years without having to get more minerals to mine them. On the other hand,
if you buy the marketing literature, they last about 12 years.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for that, Ray. And I think it should be pursued further, but maybe not right here, right now. You might want to get JW's book to see what he's saying about these things. It might interest you. It's free, and we're going to offer that at the end in a slide.
Kendall, let me just make a few quick comments on Ray's thoughts. Ray, the data on soil moisture and plant growth, there is data on that, and it's only in the western part of the United States where they have data. It's in California in the desert, and in Arizona in the desert. It's not in Virginia. So there is some reality to that, but it depends on the topography that the solar field is built on. Okay, that's the first part of that. Okay. It's true that the reality is that if we cover the earth in solar panels, the mining impact would be significantly worse, not worse than coal, but worse than other fossil fuels. Just have to come to grips with that. But in the end, I think that you have to think about Virginia, and that some of the testimonial that have been presented as fact aren't fact, and you have to also look at where the data is coming from. Our interest is for Virginia, not for Southern California.
Well, one thing that you can say is that there are different approaches to this avoiding CO2, sequestering CO2. Trees and plants sequester carbon dioxide. Solar production avoids the carbon dioxide production in the first place. For every kilowatt hour of solar production from fossil fuels, it replaces, that's produced, the electricity from fossil fuels replaced by solar production, about 1.7 pounds of carbon dioxide will never be released into the atmosphere. That's for
Ray,
every kilowatt hour.
I think we'd like to hold the discussion for a different time.
Okay, thank you.
You were
I
getting near
appreciate
the
your
end.
time.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you for being here. And I think we'd like to move towards the end of our program. Karuna, is there a chance you could run those clips of Dan Holmes right now before you show the final slides for our webinar?
Yes, I can. And what I'll start, I have 3 of them queued up to start. I'm going to ask you to tell me when to stop them. So
Okay.
let me just share my screen. Let me just get it on my screen. And one moment, please. Okay. Now, all right, trying to share my screen. Here we go. Zoom. Share. Here we go.
Second. So how much in Virginia? Currently it's the prediction, and Jeff, I expect you to correct me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff, but what I've heard from the industry is we're looking at about 1.5 to 2.5% of the land mass of Virginia to meet our energy demands in the future. And some of that will depend on whether or not we have full electrification of our vehicle fleets. But again, that's typically what I've been hearing is the range that we're looking at. Pointing out that obviously, depending on where that land mass is, what land mass are we using, would highlight the number of conflicts it might have with regard to other goals of the Commonwealth, say with regard to forestry or habitat, for example. There's also some concern about, as we move forward, how are we dealing with the nature of renewables. Obviously, the sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing. And so the choices that we make and how we are dealing with that is very important with regard to overall environmental impact. Currently, we have natural gas peaking plants providing the majority of the backup for our solar facilities. That is not ideal. We would like to see greater incorporation of batteries, and I think the industry would agree with us on this. This is one of these areas where the quicker we see deployed battery backup for these facilities, the quicker we'll see the retirement of the natural gas facilities that cause us other concerns with regard to environmental protection. As well, the conversation of utility scale versus DG, and I put versus in there. I'm not trying to make this a fight, but obviously this is push and pull of how we meet those energy choices and what impact it has on the ground. And you're going to hear me state a strong preference for distributed generation. In other words, rooftop solar, brownfield siting of solar, siting solar closer to the demand. So we're actually getting other grid benefits from that approach versus, say, a utility scale model that relies on a distant power plant that's shipping energy towards the demand centers. And how we meet this demand will ultimately dictate what the impact on the landscape will be. So again, what future will we choose in trying to meet our energy goals?
So Karuna, now, if you want to move forward, you can, or you can go ahead and play this connected with the next.
With regard to promoting distributed generation, we can reduce the amount that has to occur on greenfields by making better decisions on avoidance with regard to specific resources. We can avoid those impacts from our utility scale projects as well. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is this is actually from a Virginia Commonwealth University study on the land cover that is that is in place at the solar facilities that are permitted or under construction or currently in use. And what we found when we looked at Virginia was 58% of the solar facilities that are currently in play occurred on forested property. 24.9% of that land was cropland as well. So right there, right off the bat, I'm going to highlight that even if we are fully embracing utility scale as the measure forward, these are impacts I think that we can avoid. Actually clearing our forests, while I will acknowledge the carbon benefit of solar is higher than the forest itself, we tend to lose in that argument, we tend to lose sight of the fact that the forest provides a whole series of ecosystem benefit, including habitat, including water quality and other things that are important in meeting the goals with regard to environmental protection of the Commonwealth. As well, we talk about cropland. Some of our best soils are actually being impacted by this choice. And we want to make sure that if those soils are pursued for location of utility scale solar, that at the end of the useful life of the project, that property can be returned back to useful agriculture. So how we treat those soils in the development process does matter. And I'm going to be very clear that the industry is very broad. And I'm going to say there are good actors and there are actors that I would put in another bucket. So I just want to make very clear, there are many people that are pursuing utility scale projects that are keeping these issues in mind. It's just not all. And obviously, therefore, we're seeing greater levels of conflict on the ground.
And Karuna, if you'll stop there and go on to the 21-minute point.
Okay.
I'm having trouble seeing it. It's not a big screen. I'm seeing
okay.
two people in the waiting room right now.
Oh, thank you. I'll admit them, but we are at the end of our 90 minutes now, so.
This will be the last thing. It's just short.
Okay.
The 21.
Just to, again, point out about distributed generation, what do we mean? You can see here in this image, there is a picture of some rooftop solar over a parking lot. So again, creating canopies over these parking areas. These things can be combined as well with charging stations for these vehicles. These systems can be put on flat roof space. They can be put on any roof, to be honest with you. So again, what we're looking at trying to do is do an evaluation of the flat roof space and roof space in our region that would actually help accommodate this type of energy source closer to that demand area. And it's interesting, I just wanted to note that recently there was a discussion about a project for solar in Dulles Airport. And Dulles was trying to suggest, okay, let's get 100 megawatts. It's going to take 880 acres of land to achieve that source. And we asked the question, what could be done on your rooftops and your parking lots? And they determined that 80 to 83% of the total project, in other words, 80 to 83 megawatts, could be met on those rooftops. Now, of course, that drives up costs. So the question is where is the balance here? But ultimately, the point is that we can pursue a more sensitive design with the greenfield portion of that project and include a vast portion on rooftops and actually produce more than the 100 megawatts that they're actually asking permission to proceed with. In other words, how can we reduce those impacts and increase the amount of generation from that project? And those are the types of questions we're asking.
Thank you,
again,
Karuna.
Project in Dulles, what I would say is,
Okay.
That concludes that part of it. If you'd like to go forward.
Yes, I will do so. Let me. Okay. We have 3 more screens. Hanuman, would you like to address them?
I think Scott was going to give our closing, weren't you,
Yes,
Scott?
Yes, I can do that. Well, thank you to the participants who joined today's Friends of Buckingham Zoom. We hope you gain insights into the complex issues impacting us all. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for taking your time, JW and Dave, to come and attend this and share your insights, share your views, and to help add to this conversation. So we've probably asked more questions today than we had answers for, but I hope everyone can come away with this understanding, the importance of these decisions that are being made at this time. I'd like to thank all the volunteers, the officers, council members who put this on. Friends of Buckingham is an all-volunteer organization, and it's really amazing to see a group come together like this and work hard to present such an amazing thing. You can see some of the slides that are being put up right now on how to contact us. So that's a way to get in touch with us in the future. We are going to have this video on the website, so that will be available. We are going to attempt to answer the other questions here in the near future as well. So hopefully get some more insights on that. As far as follow-up actions, if you're trying to educate yourself more about solar, there are, Google, you can alert for keywords that will come up. You can join us, subscribe to our newsletter. You can look for other Facebook groups, but just get involved and do the best you can to get out there and make this all right.
I'd like to add that we are a completely volunteer-based group, and on our website, we have a contact us form, which if you'd like to get involved, if you use that form, you can let us know in what way you'd like to help, what your talents and skills are, and we very much encourage that.
I think that concludes our presentation.
It does. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
And do you want to open up the room for general discussion at this point?
Thank you so much.
If anybody else would like to, we've gone 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who would like to say something? We can stop recording.
This is
No.
Ruth. I want to just say thank you very much.